What's up, everybody? Welcome into another edition of the Mac and Reed Show right here on the Barroom Network. Remember to check out all our previous shows on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, and, of course, all the audio versions only are there as well. At Barroom Network on Twitter for all the news here at the network. And follow us personally. Follow me at The Real Evan Mac. Follow Ross at Ross Reed. How are you, Ross? What's going on?
I'm swell. How are you?
I'm also swell. I love your use of swell. We're bringing it back, folks. And it should be noted that we are pre-recording this podcast. So anything that breaks on the Thursday when this airs, don't hate us. We're a little behind. We can't predict what future Evan and future Ross will think. I don't know where future Ross and future Evan will be. But we carry on, as today, the Big Bears news is, of course, the 53-man roster and Bears being pretty active on the waiver claim front and talking about the depth, talking about the great preseason record for Justin Fields and company. Oh, boy, you know what that means. We'll talk about the rest of the NFL headlines. Top 5 today is the top 5 running backs in the league. And a week away from NFL football, it is almost here. Very exciting. College football's back. I asked Ross if he'll have sex in a baseball stadium and how he feels about Alfredo sauce. We'll talk about DJ Khaled's album, Jid's album, and more surprises along the way. But as usual, we got to begin with some Bears news. And again, the roster cuts were made, and it wasn't terribly surprising in my eyes. And Ross, we'll get to you in a second on that. Who made it? Certainly Tristan Ebner, as far as rounding out the running backs roster, joining Khalil Herbert and David Montgomery, just talking about offensive positional players right now, because that's going to be a huge telling performance metric of this Bears team is how this offense does. But, you figure with vet roster cuts, there was Nathan Peterman, Michael Schofield. Boy, that did not pan out. Sean Coleman, the tackle, defensive tackle, Trayvon Coley, defensive end, Mario Edwards Jr., cornerback, Greg Stroman Jr., safety, Devontae Harris, and tight end, James O'Shaughnessy. Bears won't be keeping 5 tight ends on their 53-man roster this year, which seems like a great idea to me. Different look for the tight ends, as it's just Cole Kmet and Ryan Griffin on the roster. 9 offensive linemen. As far as centers, guards go, it's Lucas Patrick, Cody Whitehair, Sam Mustipher, Justin Fields' favorite bodyguard. The guards are Tevin Jenkins, Jatire Carter, and Zachary Thomas. The tackles are Braxton Jones, Larry Borum, and Riley Reif did make the cut. We know Larry Borum has had some scares in the past, but he is definitely important to the depth of this offensive line and offense overall. Bears kept 7 receivers, and this is all before we get to waivers in a moment here as well. Darnell Mooney, Byron Pringle, Keel Harry, who is not on IR, and we'll also get to that in a moment. Equanimous St. Brown, Velus Jones Jr., Dante Pettis, who was put on IR, was Tajay Sharp. And, a pretty thin positionally. 11 defensive backs, just focusing on that position. I know there's a lot of concern about depth there. Jalen Jones, Kyler Gordon, Kendall Vildor, Lamar Jackson, Duke Shelley, Kendall Vildor and Duke Shelley, who look like they may have been on the verge of being cut, but this is kind of a thin position when you look at the depth at corner, especially with Jalen Johnson, I should say. There's Jalen Jones and Jalen Johnson. And safeties Eddie Jackson, Jaquan Brisker, DeAndre Houston Carson, who's always there, I feel like, Dane Cruikshank, and Elijah Hicks. And so, looking at the 53-man roster, Ross, whoever I've mentioned here, and I didn't really talk about the rookies that were cut that were on the fringe here and a couple other players that you might have had an eye on, but were there any true surprises for you, or did this really shake out like you thought it would?
Yeah, I think, the biggest surprise for me, Kyra Songa got released today after the Bears got Armon Watts, who was the defensive tackle from the Vikings. They got him on the waiver wire today. Watts had 5 sacks last year with the Minnesota Vikings. The Schofield's release was a little bit surprising to me. Not in the sense that, I mean, he didn't play great in the preseason. I thought he struggled big time in that first preseason game. But, to me, he was the guy when they signed him. I thought that he was going to be a starting right guard. And I thought Tevin Jenkins was as good as gone, and all of a sudden Tevin Jenkins is just starting right guard, and it's Schofield, the veteran, who's out there looking for a new job. So I thought that was a little bit surprising to me. I think the wide receiver position as a whole is surprising to me, and pretty much the lack of depth. You kind of went through it, but right now, I mean, your starting receivers for week 1 against the 49ers are going to be Darnell Mooney, Equanimeous St. Brown. Byron Pringle looks like he's going to be back at practice in time to practice for week 1. And then you've got, Velus Jones and N'Keal Harry, who has been battling with an injury and didn't go on the IR, like you said. So they anticipate he's probably going to be back within, at least a game or two. And then Dante Pettis, the veteran, made it. And Pettis, who started on well his first couple of years in San Francisco and then kind of flamed out a little bit, found him out the league a little bit. And now he's back with the Bears. He was probably the Bears' most consistent route runner throughout the whole preseason. It's also surprising they did keep so the tight end position looks a little thin. They've got Cole Kmet and Ryan Griffin. They did pick up Trayvon Wesco today from the Jets on the waiver wire, but they kept Jake Tongs, and on the depth chart it's going to say he's listed as a fullback. So it looks like the Bears have 2 fullbacks right now, but Tongs really did actually line up more as a blocking tight end in the preseason. So I'm anticipating that the Bears like him a lot to be out there as that second blocking tight end. We're going to see him a lot in short yardage and in goal line situations. Defensively, not much surprised me. Duke Shelley's is gone. He didn't really show much. He wasn't really, a guy this regime probably thought of real highly. Right now, your starting corners are probably Vendell on the outside and Jalen Johnson, and Kyler Gordon is going to be able to mix in between playing nickel and playing outside as well. But none of that surprised me. But I think as a whole, Ryan Poles really went in. Ryan. We're gonna do that a lot this year. He really went in on going for depth and upside at offensive line. And again, the Bears continue to, kind of not really address this wide receiver position. And you wonder if they're going to address it between now and week 1 or after week 1. There's still a lot of good veteran wide receivers out there. Preston Wilson got released out of Miami. Odell Beckham Jr. recovering from torn ACL. Will Fuller has been out there as well. Emanuel Sanders is a guy that's out there right now. So you wonder if one of those guys gets brought in, or is that good news on the front of Pringle being able to play week 1? I think he'll play week 1. But also N'Keal Harry being to be out there sooner than later and, probably contribute sooner than later as well.
It's a thin group of wide receiver. It's just a bunch of guys, right? And you touched on tight end. It's so different when you remember just at least the trifecta, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan Griffin has been around a minute, but he was just lost in the shuffle because of Jesse James, because of Jimmy Graham, and because of Cole Kmet, obviously, last year. Obviously, no one on the Bears offense really thrived and really stood out. But this receiving core, it's tough to picture them excelling. They're one injury away. Like if one of these guys goes down, and Equanimeous St. Brown, or if it's, God forbid, Darnell Mooney, someone like that, then this offense really starts to struggle. And you're treating Darnell Mooney in the same class as, looking at the NFC North. I know, like, now that Devontae Adams is gone, Allen Lazard is the guy, but he's might not excel as much as a slot receiver. But you look at him in the same breath as a Justin Jefferson, like, is that even realistic? I'm not so sure. But I echo what you said. Defensively, it didn't seem like there were too many surprises. But that they were active. They were the most active on the waiver wire today, as far as getting Alex Leatherwood claimed off of waivers, who was cut by the Raiders. It's the last of the John Gruden regime. Now the Raiders are trying to move along. Defensive tackle Armani Watts, defensive back Josh Blackwell, defensive end Kingsley Jonathan, linebacker Sterling Weatherford, tight end Trevin Wesco. More news has broken since then, and Ross will bring us up to speed. The Alex Leatherwood thing was interesting. I know that he It's a Bama guy, had a lot of hype to him. He's a former first-round pick. At this point, you're just really signing him perhaps to the practice squad. You're looking at who is going to fill out that practice squad right now and challenge these starters to get them reps there. Did you have thoughts on the waiver claims, if it was good or bad or just didn't move the radar for you?
Yeah, I mean, the Leatherwood thing is interesting, right? Here's a guy who was drafted in the first round last year, and the Raiders paid out over 50% of his contract already, and they still decided to release him. And I kind of get it on their end. Josh McDaniels is the new head coach, new general manager there. That's not the same regime from Gruden and Mayock, but it's still. Leatherwood, the fact that you paid out most of his guaranteed salary already, I was just really surprised that they released him. I don't think he was a first-round pick, and a lot of people don't think he was a first-round pick last year, but he probably was in the neighborhood of second to third-round pick. And I think the young man just needs a little bit more time to develop. He came from a big-time program at Alabama. He's got the pedigree, he's got the size, he's got the athleticism. And I actually like Ryan Poles kind of buying low on this guy. I mean, the Bears have the cap space, so the cap space is not a thing to me. And I like him, bringing him into their infrastructure and their situation. Remember, Ryan Poles, former offensive lineman, right? Ian Cunningham was the assistant general manager, also a former offensive lineman. And, all of a sudden, I feel like the Bears think that they can kind of rejuvenate and restructure a lot of these outcast offensive linemen. It's already seemed to work so far for guys like Larry Borom and Tevin Jenkins. So why not bring in Leatherwood? And if he's something going forward, then the Bears kind of hit a home run there, because he could either replace Cody Whitehair as your left guard of the future if you want to kick him inside, or if you want to leave him as a tackle position, maybe he could take Larry Borum's spot at right tackle, and Borum can flip over to the left side. Maybe Braxton Jones doesn't work out for you. It doesn't matter. The Bears have a ton of options right now, and all these kids are young. Now all of a sudden you have Borum and Jenkins and Jones and Leatherwood, right? And all of a sudden, and even Mustapher, who's had a better preseason in camp than he did last year. And the Bears just have a nice, good group of young, athletic offensive linemen, and they're probably going to add to that even more in the draft next year. But if some of these guys hit, then you don't have to. Then, maybe their great plan comes together, and that's when they say we'll hit more. We'll pick up 1 to 2 more wide receivers in the draft from next year. So I like the Leatherwood signing a lot.
Yeah, you touched on just Ryan Poles' effect, and it feels like, when you have that background, obviously a guy who played on the offensive line, he's probably going to be a better judge of talent, or more hard on these guys who do make the cut and who are claimed by the Bears. And Leatherwood, Coach Matt Eberflus is all for it. He said he has as far as Leatherwood is concerned, he has a clean slate. He was surprised that Leatherwood was available via waivers. He said, we've got nothing but good reports, and we're excited to have him, and we'll see where he goes from here. It's a clean slate. It's a fresh start from him, and we'll see where we start him at. We're not going to disclose that right now. Still working with the coaches on that, but it's a clean slate. It's a clean slate and a fresh start for him. The fresh start thing, I think, works wonders for a lot of these players who, especially from a toxic sort of franchise perspective, like the Raiders had. Obviously they're trying to turn around right now. Defensively, I did want to talk to you, Ross. You mentioned like Duke Shelley. As of several hours ago, he was still, making the cut, and then he does get cut really like at the last minute, essentially. I feel like as far as this defensive back positional, 11 guys that are making the 53-man roster, as far as this position goes, are you confident? I know that with the rookies, there's a lot of concern. I don't know, as far as concern, if you ask Jaquan Brisker, he is looking for the season opener, and he says he feels great. But is there a lot of concern with the depth here? And do you think that they're well suited to go into the season? It just feels like, the Bears and NFL overall, if you look at any team, it's tough from an injury perspective to even play now that the seasons are longer, to play 16 games, 17 games, whatever it is, to play the full slate is ridiculous. But, can these guys make it a half the season if we're looking at the projected starters really going like they are?
Yeah, I'm a little concerned with the depth at that cornerback position, mostly because I'm not a big fan of Kendall Vildor, excuse me, who's
Yeah.
starting on the outside. I think that guy was burnt toast last year. Maybe a different scheme will be able to help him out. I think the fact that the Bears do have Brisker kind of dropping down as that in the box safety and allowing Eddie Jackson to hover more at the top, which is where he excelled at a couple years ago in that Vic Fangio position, will help guys both like Kendall Vildor and Jalen Johnson. But I get concerned about Vindel out there on the outside, and I think that's a very weak spot on the Bears defense. I'm a huge Kyler Gordon fan. I think that guy's going to be a star in the league, but he can't play inside and outside at the same time. And he's going to follow probably at this moment for his rookie season the number 2 receivers on the field. So let's say hypothetically it's week whatever, and the Bears are playing the Vikings, right? Well, the Vikings are going to throw Adam Thielen at you, and then they're going to throw Justin Jefferson at you. Now, if Justin Jefferson lines up inside, he's probably going to see Gordon or Jalen Johnson. But if he's outside, and let's say, Adam Thielen is outside as well, and they have another slot receiver out there, then who's going to line up outside Adam Thielen? Those are the kind of things that worry me the most, because if it's Vindel, I don't like that at all. Adam Thielen is still a very good wide receiver in this league. He's going to cook him. If it's Gordon, I feel good about that, but then also I worry about the slot receiver. So I do think the Bears need another corner, but it is what it is right now. They got young guys on the roster like Jalen Jones. Maybe he's able to step up. Lamar Jackson, the other Lamar Jackson was retained the team. Yep, and maybe he can fill into that void as well too. But Vildor is the only thing that worries me. And the pass rush worries me a little bit too. I like Gibson and I like Quinn a lot, but there's not a lot of depth outside of them. I think Muhammad, who played in this defense last year, with Eberflus, is a good rotational guy, but you've got some really young green guys outside of that. Dominic Robinson and Kingsley Jonathan are both rookies. I do love the pickup of Watts, though, from Minnesota. He was a defensive tackle in a 4-3 system last year. He had 5 sacks. He was a productive player. They moved to a 3-4 this year, so he didn't really quite fit their position anymore. But I do think that he's going to be out there along with him, Justin Jones, and Angelo Blackson, and give them a good rotational push up the middle.
I would hope so. When I looked at weaknesses, certainly defensively, as much as we think in a scheme that Matt Eberflus is going to thrive, the rest of this, defensive roster looks kind of suspect. When you look at the defensive line, I know Robert Quinn had a great year last year, which is great to see. Hopefully he can repeat some of that production. But Al-Qadim Muhammad, you wonder if he's going to be, on the other side of the defense there, playing opposite Robert Quinn, how he's going to do. And then Travis Gibson, we've seen Angelo Blackson before, Justin Jones, there's high expectations there. And then linebackers, we know Roquan Smith. I think that's an important point to hammer down is he is going to be, obviously he's embracing his leadership role, and he definitely wants to play for that larger contract that he thinks he deserves when he obviously, went in on the Bears organization as far as dragging them through the mud. And now he just really has to play one of his best seasons of his career to look and justify that. But between the corners and between the defensive backs, I should say, and defensive line, it looks a little suspect. But we've seen this before too. I mean, I wasn't really impressed with, when Willie Young was on the roster, and maybe Al-Qadim Muhammad has some production like him, or you name a defensive end here, a Mark Anderson type. So we'll see. It remains to be seen. I think this shook out like we expected. And hey, I mean, all these contributions, whoever made the 53-man roster, I think, you saw contributed to the Bears. It doesn't mean anything. Obviously, we'll all forget about it come next year and the years to come. That the Bears were 3-0 in the preseason. Circling back to that real quick, also with Justin Fields and his performance, we saw him throw 3 touchdowns in the first half. And again, it was against suspect competition. You're not seeing these full starters out there. But it all circles back to certainly the defense, the questions that you have about this Bears team Is the defense going to click, and is Justin Fields going to have great options around him? Is he going to make that jump in the second year? And you saw the poise. You saw a lot of people just heralding Matt Eberflus, and Luke Getsy especially should get a lot of credit for the way that Justin Fields was able to get out of the pocket and throw on the run and build some chemistry with these tight ends, certainly with Ryan Griffin and Cole Kmet thought in the last preseason game, and his receivers, because the receivers are just a bunch of dudes right now. The Bears still haven't hit on truly that number one. I know there's big expectations with Darnell Mooney. We shall see with this year. But did that 3-0 preseason mean anything to you, Ross? And I mean, certainly builds a little bit of confidence with when this is what we haven't even mentioned now, is this is the youngest roster in the NFL at this point with the average age.
Yeah, I tweeted that earlier. The Bears now have the most rookies on the roster than any other team in the league. And last year they were the oldest team in the league, and now they jumped to one of the youngest teams in the league. And I think that's a testament to, Ryan Poles not liking what he was inherited, by from Ryan Pace. And also, him just trying to change the culture in that building. And this is a young man's sport. You have to get younger out there and more athletic, and that's what he's doing. I was impressed with the preseason that they have, just because a couple things stood out to me. I felt like the Bears were the most prepared team on the field throughout all three of their three preseason games. Very low on the turnover count, very low on the penalties count. Those things are things that you can look at that transfer over to the regular season. And I love the continuity that they had on offense. It was simple. But it allowed Justin Fields to make the right read. I mean, listen, this guy was basically the most accurate quarterback that we had in the preseason. Yes, you can kind of take that with a grain of salt, but also when you're talking about your second, year quarterback and your young guy, he needs that. He needs that confidence going into the season. He needs to kind of see that and feel that, so he can go out there week one and kind of play his game against the 49ers. One of the things that I loved is that Eberflus decided to even play his starters for as long as he did in that third game. He didn't have to do that. I thought after that Seattle game that they were done basically until week one, but he said, no, we need the work and we need the reps and we need the live game reps to be able to do it. And it served to his advantage. Look what happens. Justin Fields goes out there and throws 3 touchdowns. You can't tell me that doesn't matter for him and Luke Getsy and the rest of those guys for that offense going into the 49ers for week one. And that just builds their confidence and allows them to know that they can do this. So I was impressed in that regard, and I think that it generated a lot of buzz for the city and for the franchise. And, we don't know what this season is going to happen, right? They could win anywhere between, I think, 4 to 8, 9 games. Is a huge window for the Bears. But to be able to have that kind of confidence and energy going into week one, at the very least, is exciting right now.
Look, Justin Fields, as a number one quarterback, he took his lumps last year. It was very tough to see. But between those lumps that we saw where he was fumbling or where he threw interceptions and not excelling as an NFL quarterback, you forget it comes back down to earth that he is a rookie and he had a lot of nerves and had to adjust to the speed of the game. And in the second year, I think there's obviously high expectations. I think it comes back to a fresh start and a clean slate, like we were talking about Alex Leatherwood. And it's very important to remember that with Justin Fields, that he will certainly treat it there when he's a guy who has thrived on clean slates, talking about his Georgia years in college and then jumping to Ohio State. I have no doubt that he is going to make some strides. I can't predict his yardage as far as throwing and touchdown count, but I do know that under this new system, it certainly looked like in the preseason, when you're looking at NFL speed and NFL talent around him, looked like he got comfortable, right? And it's a tough start. You can never really take a lot from the first few games of the NFL season anyways. Teams that start 4-0 could easily lose the next 12 games or whatever it is now, 15 games. So with that in mind, I think expectations are pretty high. And I think now you're seeing the Bears obviously we're a bit of homers being Chicago Bears fans, but we see the narrative nationally every year. And, we talk about Colin Cowherd. We talk about everybody else just talking about how this Tevin Jenkins trade mill rumor mill was swirling for a long time. And Justin Fields not being in the right offense with Mike Martz. It's enough is enough. And I hope that the Bears turn this around. The expectations are low. You look at ticket prices, and this is one of the first times you feel like tickets are under $100 to go to a Bears game when the team is not expected to do well. But you look around the division when you were touching on that, Ross, and why not? Why couldn't the Bears compete with Aaron Rodgers, who's on the downtick, now losing his number one wide receiver and losing an offensive coordinator and Luke Getsy? Between Minnesota and Detroit and Green Bay, I think the Bears have definitely a great chance to thrive and at least be very competitive towards the top there. And obviously, those first few games, I did say you can't tell a lot, but it's going to be very important for the development of Justin Fields.
100%. And listen, at some point, you've got to take the bull by the horns and say, you know what? Enough is enough. Whatever the national pundits say or anybody else, and even guys like us on podcasts, whatever we say, it just doesn't matter. We're gonna have to go out there between the lines and play football and give it all we got. And let's see this team and this franchise make a big tangible step forward, right? Listen, Green Bay is not going to run the North forever, and Aaron Rodgers is not going to be there forever. And that guy's human. He's been taking Percocets, I guess, playing football games. And he has one of the worst receiving cores in the league last year too. Like, listen, that guy's a little bit of a wounded animal right now. At some point, you're gonna have to go get it, right? You have to go take it from him. He's not gonna give it to you. They're not gonna give it to you. And hopefully, the Bears go get it. Hopefully, they have the quarterback that they can go get it with. I'm 40 years old. I'll be 41 years old in almost a month. I've never seen a true franchise quarterback in my lifetime as a Bears fan. We've gotten close from the Jay Cutlers of the world to the Jim McMahons of the world, right? But we've never seen a true perennial Pro Bowl, all-pro quarterback. And that's what I really hope that we can get out of this year is I've always said, I've been around record, I don't care about the wins and losses this year. I want Justin Fields at the end of this year to be like, holy shit, we got one. And if we can get to that point, then I feel great about next year and going forward after that.
It's very important. You look at around the NFL, former quarterbacks are praising Justin Fields at this point, and they think the only thing that could potentially hold him back is certainly the roster around him. But if you put a couple guys in front of him, and as far as the offensive line goes, obviously expectations are high there too. But Justin Fields looks like he's taken those strides and has adjusted. Guys like Bruce Arians calling him a rising superstar, and other former quarterbacks around the league and coaches. It's exciting to see. And certainly, my lifetime, I wasn't alive to see the '85 Bears. And Ross, you weren't too much older than me at that point. You were 18?
4 years old. Yeah, 18.
So, yeah, to see a franchise quarterback for the Bears would just be unbelievable. To see Justin Fields develop into that guy, I know now someone drew comparisons to Patrick Mahomes. Like, oh my God! And of course, talking about Mitchell Trubisky in the past, he was thrown in that conversation as well. But I do think he'll make some strides. I think it'll be tough. But as far as the NFC North is concerned, it's going to be competitive, and the Bears to lose, for the foreseeable future at this point. We miss any Bears notes in your eyes, Ross?
No, I don't think so. Just at this point, it's going to be interesting to kind of watch if they make any more moves before week 1, or is this the kind of roster that we have that they put a large amount of waivers claims in today. I believe it was 6 total. So they turned over about 10%, a little bit over 10% of their roster from yesterday to today. So is this the group that they're going to roll with week 1? And if it is, that's fine. And then from there, it comes down to who's healthy enough to play against San Francisco in week 1. We got good news today that Jaquan Brisker, rookie safety, was back at practice. We need to hear more about Kyler Gordon to make sure he's okay. We need to hear about Velus Jones. We haven't heard about him in a while since the KC game. Make sure he's okay. I expect Brian Pringle to be back out there. Make sure that he's okay as well. What's going on with Lucas Patrick? Is he going to start at center? Or is it going to be Sam Mustipher? Those are the kind of things that we need to look at between now and September 11th. At kickoff at noon, is just who's healthy on this team going into week 1.
Health will be paramount for the Bears, as we know. High expectations have been tanked, and their performance overall has been tanked by the injury bug, and that can be said about any league, and that's any team in the league, I should say. It's so tough, especially with these longer seasons as they go along here. So moving on to the rest of the NFL, I know that Baker Mayfield is pumped to see the Browns in week 1, and we talked about the waiver claims. There weren't too many surprise cuts. I know that as far as guys who were really outspoken, Denzel Mims, he was really frustrated about his Jets situation, and then you look at Sony Michel, he returned right back to LA and signed with the Chargers. But is there anything that stood out to you? Eagles dealt the Jalen Reagor to the Vikings. Is there anything else that stood out to you as far as moves at this point where teams are trimming down their rosters?
No, nothing else really stood out to me. I mean, everything, other than what the Bears did, kind of went pretty chalk. The Bills got themselves basically an all-pro caliber punter after the whole Matt Ariza situation that we didn't even talk about, but that whole situation was a mess, and we saw that unfold this weekend. The rookie punter from San Diego State that they nicknamed Punk God obviously now has some serious rape and statutory rape and sexual abuse allegations that he has to deal with right now. And that was a very nasty situation. The Bills, released him on Saturday, and they were able to pick up a damn good punter that was released in Denver, just a couple of days ago. So, they kind of made out in a good spot there. But other than that, nothing really stood out to me. Now it's just kind of like, like you said, who's hurt, who's going to be healthy going into week 1, who guys are going to land on, IR and stuff like that. You look at guys like, what's the wide receiver's name down in like Godwin down in Tampa Bay? Is he going to be ready to go? Is Michael Galloway going to be ready to go by week 1? Both those teams play each other the first game of the season. Things like that. Who's going to be healthy going to week 1? And do some of these veteran players start hearing their phones ring that have been on the sidelines for a little while and maybe get a chance? We talked about guys like Odell Beckham Jr. and the Emanuel Sanders of the world. We saw Sony Michel get signed today by the Chargers. So that's the thing that you got to keep an eye on going forward through the weekend is do some of these veterans now get phone calls to join the team?
I know a lot of people are drafting their fantasy teams at this point too, and looking at teams that have had a lot of injury history. We look at the Ravens last year, focus on them and J.K. Dobbins, and then turning around and losing Gus Edwards. That was just unbelievable. But we know we see it throughout the league. Christian McCaffrey has that injury history. We saw Derrick Henry. But the running back position, as we'll talk about in a moment here, is really paramount for a lot of the successes of the teams around here. And you look at the Rams, it's very different. Looking at the 2 Super Bowl contenders, to me, it was a little bit different than the Bengals. The Rams was more of a committee, and certainly they dealt with injuries in their season. But you look at Joe Mixon, who was a top 5 rusher in the league, and how he was able to be the lead back there. I'm curious to see who's going to pan out in this top 5 as we get to it now in running backs. And, the guys who didn't make it on my list are guys who just didn't play those complete seasons, right? Because we talked about linebackers and how tough it is to be fully healthy throughout the season. You talk about a Melvin Gordon, you talk about Ezekiel Elliott, who has had injury concerns, but still had, played a 17-game season last year and had over 1,000 yards, and it was, a top tier running back, like tier 1 at one point there, and could be this year. We don't know. Guys like Alvin Kamara, who's one of the most versatile running backs that you can think of. David Montgomery, who, had a bit of injury, bad luck this past year as well. But the top 5 this week is running backs. And are you ready for your 5? You want to honorable mention anybody before I get to my 5?
Yeah, I think, honorable mention is, boy, it's tough, right? It's, guys like is Deebo Samuel a running back, right? Or is he a wide receiver? It's kind of the conversation that we had last week when we were trying to figure that whole thing out, because he kind of splits his time there. I'm a big fan of James Conner, but I don't think he quite cracks my top 5 for me. I'm a big fan of David Montgomery here in Chicago, but he doesn't quite crack my top 5 for me either. Neither does a guy like that's Saquon Barkley, who's had his fair share of injuries. But I think that a guy like Saquon Barkley could be, in the top 5 end of the season. I expect him to have a big bounce back year. I'm always looking at the guys that are 2 years removed from the big injuries, and that's usually when they bounce back. A la Cooper Kupp last year, who tore his ACL a couple years ago. So, those kind of guys to me are kind of on the fringe, looking in.
Yeah, that's fair. So number 5 for me is Nick Chubb, and the former Georgia Bulldog and current Cleveland Brown. Don't get me started on that franchise. Just like that, Nick Chubb is a positive part of it. But he has been the model of consistency, and also just similar to wide receiver ranking in the top 5. You look for complete backs. You look for complete players, right? So they can block, they can, rush between the tackles, they can break some tackles, they can go out and catch the football, they can be physical, all of that, the complete thing. And I think these 5 certainly fit that bill. So Nick Chubb had a little over 1,200 yards. He had one of his better seasons at 26 years old. He had 8 touchdowns in 14 games played, which is pretty great. You figure most of these running backs aren't going to play that full gamut of 17 games unless they're up for a contract year, or just nuts. But great size for a back. He's been consistent again throughout his years in the NFL. And when I think of guys who break tackles and don't shy away from contact, I think of Nick Chubb. And him amongst others like Derrick Henry and David Montgomery. David Montgomery, I think, led the league in broken tackles last year. But I can only imagine what his production would look like, and it might be a negative too, with Kareem Hunt as a teammate. But I think that on the positive end, it spells him, and that's what you need now too, is to have some backups. And you saw with when David Montgomery, in the Bears' perspective, went down, you saw Khalil Herbert bounce right back there. And depth is so important when you have terrible injury history like the Ravens, or like the Panthers when Chuba Hubbard had to step up for McCaffrey. And really having Hunt helped out Chubb's workload tremendously. There's no question who the top back is in that backfield for the Browns, and it's Nick Chubb. And he's, again, former SEC tailback who just really continues to thrive in the NFL. And I have no doubt that he's going to be in the top 5 rushing again this year.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Nick Chubb. I think he's one of the most ferocious runners in the league. He's the kind of guy that you always feel like he's going to get 5 to 6 yards no matter what his offensive line is, no matter what's going on in front of him. I'm a big fan of his. For me, my running backs, I like them to also catch the football as well. I feel like that's a big part of what they do now in 2022. So Chubb is one of my honorable mention guys. My number 5 is a guy that the Bears see twice a year up in the north and from Minnesota, and that's Dolphin Cook. Dolphin Cook is an explosive running back. He's had some injury issues early on in his career, but he bounced back last year, had an outstanding season. And this is a guy that has extreme breakaway speed from the line of scrimmage, can take it to the house at any moment. Good receiving back, great runner between the tackles, can bounce to the outside. He can be physical. He can be fast if you want to. And in that offense, on that turf up there in Minnesota, he's just a force to be reckoned with. I feel like every time I watch Red Zone or something like that, the guy's, breaking off a 75, 80-yard run. So, Dalvin Cook is my number 5, Florida State guy.
It was tough for me to not put Dalvin Cook on this list. I went back and forth with Chubb, and he is certainly that honorable mention guy for me, one of them. And his workload has been great. And he had a little bit of the injury history, but look at 2020. He had 16 touchdowns. He was a beast. And look how loaded between him and Justin Jefferson. If they didn't have Kirk Cousins, I would say this team is loaded at the offense at this point. But still, playing in 13 games, going almost 1,200 yards. Good on Dolphin Cook there. And number 4 for me, looking at the youngest guy on this list, we talk about a strong rookie year, and Najee Harris had that in spades. And when we know that, like LSU wide receivers, they're just built different as far as Bama running backs are concerned. And he had 1,200 yards in his first season with the Steelers. They got a franchise running back in him if he can just continue to remain healthy, and it looks like that. He is, again, very complete to me. He can catch out of the backfield. He can run between the tackles. Durability is not a huge issue. Again, for him to go out there and be in that top 5 was super impressive. And I know that we saw Derrick Henry go down. We saw injuries to Kristen McCaffrey, and it was an up and down year for some running backs. Austin Eckler, guys like that are being spelled. Melvin Gordon. It's a lot of running backs by committee. For Dolphin Cook, for Najee Harris to go ahead and have that performance like he did as a rookie and carry that team when it was a bad year for the Steelers, he just kept going, man. And he is one of those guys too, again, that does not shy away from contact. He's a bruiser, but he also, came from basically a pro system with Nick Saban's system in Alabama, and I think future's really bright for him. I think he's in the top 5 as well again this year.
I love Najee Harris. I'm a big fan of his. I think that he played behind a bad offensive line last year for the Steelers. He played with a noodle-arm quarterback. It'll be really interesting to see what he can do this year. With a little bit of a better offensive line, still not great in Pittsburgh. But Trubisky does have a better arm. He's got weapons on the outside. I like to see him get more opportunities in the passing game this year, but I'm a big fan of his. He's a big physical guy. You talked about that Alabama pedigree. Speaking of which, I'm going to go to the king of the Alabama running backs for my number 4. Oh, and that's King Derrick Henry.
He's number 4. Oh,
he's my number 4 on my list. And I put him on number 4 on my list. That guy's he's like a Chevy 150, or one of those pickup trucks, right? He's got about 160 miles on him right now, but that guy's still trucking. He's still going through. You can still load it up, and he's still going to come through for you, right? Just good old faithful. He battled some injuries, the foot injury and stuff like that. But this guy, MVP at one point. He's just a beast of a running back, just a tough guy to bring down. He's still out there churning yards. He's still out there getting it done. I think he's an underrated receiver. I think that they don't use him enough. He's a decent receiver. He's still one of the best goal line backs in the league. And I fully expect Derrick Henry to just continue out there and be Old Faithful this year again. Get over 1,000 yards. Get over 10 touchdowns again for the Titans, and really be the guy that is going to drive their offense, especially now that they don't have A.J. Brown there anymore. They really going to have to rely on Derrick Henry a lot more. And if he continues to put another season like that together, you really, really have to start talking about, is this guy a Hall of Fame candidate one day in his career? Is he going to be able to put up enough career stats to get himself in the Hall of Fame? And it's tough for running backs these days because they don't have that shelf life. But Derrick Henry's been good in this league for a long time now, and he's the kind of guy I'm not going to bet against him until he shows me that he's really fallen off a cliff and can't do it anymore.
As tough as they come, that's for sure. And the only thing that was a negative for him last year was the injury. And number 3 for me, as we move on to the top 5, is Joe Mixon. I mentioned earlier talking about the Bengals, and a large part of their success was that backfield. And Joe Mixon in the top 5 in yards and attempts and touchdowns last year. You talk about, besides a year of injury setbacks, he has been consistent in his performance with the best one to date last year. He's bigger than you think at 6'1", and former Oklahoma Sooner. And I wouldn't say he's a bruiser, but if you need some yardage, that's the guy to go to. Joe Burrow and company like Jamar Chase are going to, and the receiving core overall with T. Higgins and company, Todd, Boyd are all going to get a lot of the headlines, I feel like. But Joe Mixon does a lot of the dirty work, whether he's coming out of the backfield on a screen or running, a slant route, just coming to trickle out of the backfield, something like that. He is really important and a very important reason why the Bengals went to the Super Bowl last year. And I think that he's going to certainly have a repeat performance this next year around. He had a little over 1,200 yards. It wasn't, besides the top guy, who was Jonathan Taylor, it wasn't, super flashy. It was a lot of guys just kind of after that, just a few yards, separated by each other after that point. But Joe Mixon was super impressive. And I think, you talk about age and talk about just guys who are durable like that and able to adjust to a newer quarterback, a newer system like he did. And man, he's ready to repeat that similar performance this year.
Huge Joe Mixon fan. I love that. I mean, listen, that guy got to that franchise when they really didn't have anything, and it was a big struggle for him early on in his career. And now he's one of the major pieces as to why they're so good. He's kind of like the little engine that churns that offense. I mean, everybody's going to who's going to look at Joe Burrow, obviously, and Jamar Chase, and even Tyler Boyd, but. To me, Joe Mixon, again, he's that guy that I just talked about. I like hard runner, inside, outside, but also is a great wide receiver as well, and he's on a great offense. So he's going to be able to still put up some major stats this year. Very similar to my number 3 guy. And my number 3 guy is Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler, I think, goes under the radar a lot because, again, very similar to Joe Mixon. Eckler has to deal with Justin Herbert, and he has to deal with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. But every time I look up, Austin Eckler has like over 100 yards from scrimmage every single game, and he's got a touchdown. And it's like, anytime they need a key third down, whether it's a run, whether it's a catch or whatever, I feel like it's Austin Eckler. If there's a 40, 50-yard play and it's breaking from a run or a catch, it's Austin Eckler. And I think that guy is just all reliable for them. He's all reliable for Justin Herbert. And he's a big part of why that offense is able to do what they do and everybody in that offense. I'm a big Austin Eckler fan. He's also a guy that has struggled with some injuries, but he was able to stay healthy last year, and he had an explosive year. And as long as that guy's healthy, he's one of the most dynamic football players in the NFL.
We talked about receiving backs, and he's in that top tier for sure. When you think about him, a couple of years removed from almost getting 1,000-yard season receiving as a running back is absurd, and certainly benefiting from a lot of the attention going to Keenan Allen and Mike Williams and Justin Herbert and the rest of this company. He's a durable guy, and almost having 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns last year. He finds a way to get in the end zone. It's a great pick at number 3. Number 2, I echo everything you said about Derrick Henry. He's just a little bit higher on the list to me. He might even be number 1. I think that really, if he had finished out the season last year, we'd be having a completely different conversation. If he had played out, maybe 15 of 17 games, something like that. He had that shortened season, and he was able to stay in the top 10 in running back stats. And based on these single-digit games, that alone is impressive. But more impressive is, of course, just the monster of a man that is Derrick Henry. And he's the biggest back on the, in this group, where he's 6'3" and he's 250. He's just built like one of these linebackers you would hate to see going across the middle if you're a wide receiver. But he's playing at running back, and he has the speed to boot, which we've seen before. The knock on him is certainly the years and the fracture in his foot might be coupled with his age to put him, again, further down this list at this point. But you can't forget about the 2,000-yard season. He is just a year removed from that. And when you think about top running backs of the last several years, you think about guys who have been able to overcome injuries and whatever personal setbacks they've had too. And really, you think, obviously they're a little bit of different players, but man, like the closest thing to Adrian Peterson we have seen thus far, where he is able to do it, and even an edge over Adrian Peterson, we see that he's able to be a great wide receiver out of the backfield as well. It's incredible. I think he stands out, especially opponents were talking about him in this year and years past about how he just has that different gear. Come the fourth quarter, it's a huge part throughout the league and throughout sports is to finish games. And he went ahead and he would finish games for the Titans. We saw him have 3 touchdown performances. Like, none of these guys are coming close to that. And I'm almost, like arguing against my number 1 pick at this point. But he is a terrifying guy to see. We see the memes and gifs of him as a stiff arm monster and what he is able to do. But he is that lone real bright spot, I think, also on the negative side of the Titans. So I feel like I would just try to load the backfield at this point and pressure him and Ryan Tannehill. But man, Derrick Henry, every bit, maybe number 1, but he's my number 2.
Yeah, we talked about Derrick Henry at length. I mean, he's still getting it done, which is super impressive. I would never want to be in a phone booth with that guy or stuck between the tackles trying to bring him down. Boy,
couldn't fit in a phone booth with him.
No, we've seen some of the stiff arms that he's throwing out in the football field of guys trying to tackle him. It's a nightmare. My number 2 is listen. I'm taking a leap of faith for a guy that has only played 10 football games in the last 2 years. But when he's healthy and on the football field, there are not too many that are more dynamic than him, and that's Kristen McCaffrey. And listen, I understand he's had some injury issues the last couple of years, but going back to that 2019 season, Kristen McCaffrey played all 16 games. He had 1,300 yards rushing. He had over 1,000 yards receiving and 116 receptions, and he had 19 total touchdowns. That's like Marshall Faulk level. You know what I'm saying? That's just an absolute insane stat line. And that's something that he could do when he plays a full season. The year before that, he had over 1,000 yards and, over 100 catches again, and he had 13 touchdowns. So, listen, I hope that Christian McCaffrey can stay healthy this year. He's a dynamic athlete when he's on the football field. He's got the pedigree. His old man was a wide receiver for the Broncos, won Super Bowl rings with them. His first 3 years, he did see a lot of touches. I mean, that 2019 season alone, he saw 403 touches, which is just absolutely insane amount of touches. Since then, he has barely cracked 200 touches the last couple of years. So, but he's only 25 years old, right? And I was listening to Marshall Faulk on a podcast, and he said that he was working with Christian McCaffrey, saying, "Listen, man, it's not all about the show muscles that you have and the vanity, and we know you're jacked and you look beautiful with your shirt off and this and that, but you got to be more pliable in the football field. You got to work on your flexibility. You got to work on your conditioning and being able to move around and kind of work on." Some he's been doing more yoga and stuff like that, and just being a better athlete overall and focusing more on his health and longevity. And so I'm expecting big things from Christian McCaffrey this year. I think if you are in a fantasy league, especially in a PPR league, he's probably your number 1 option right now, just because of what he can do when he's healthy as a dual threat. But he's my number 2, and I'm just banking on the fact that I think this guy's going to stay healthy this year for the first time in a couple of years. And if he does, look out.
And you think about that fantasy perspective, just my first thought on Christian McCaffrey and seeing, we had our draft and our league, Ross, that we are in this past Sunday. And, he went number 2 overall. And how could you not pick him to go that high? Because you see the production that he had in 2019, 2018, where he combined for over 2,000 yards between rushing and receiving. That is as complete as you can get. And you saw it at the Stanford days. Really, you draw comparisons to Reggie Bush with, his collegiate stats. And then now him in the pros, he can catch the ball and he can run as well as anybody. He's elusive, but he just really thrived in that Panthers offense. And albeit this will be very different for him this year. But yeah, I'm high on Christian McCaffrey. It pained me to not put him on this list, just with Austin Eckler too, just kind of with the injury history. I am shocked that the number 1 for me is not on your list, and Jonathan Taylor. And I was hesitant to have him.
He's my number 1.
Oh, he is your number 1. I'm sorry, Christian McCaffrey is your number 2. I'm sorry.
He's my number 2.
So look at it. Yeah, look at that. Of course, we're on the same page, but it was a very different list than our wide receivers. I'll say that. We don't go over this, pre-show for those watching at home. But Jonathan Taylor, we're both in agreement then that he is certainly at number 1. He's got no real injury history. He's got it all right now. He's 23 years old. He's coming off a terrific season with the Colts. He was, of course, the best running back statistically in the league, going over 1,800 yards rushing. He's the complete back as far as catching out of the backfield, and he's dealt with bad quarterbacks and bad luck at wide receivers. But with him and Matt Ryan now in company, I think that he's in an even better position to succeed, and it'll be tough to see if he'll, go 1,800 yards like that. But for a guy who was just so durable, who rushed over 330 times last year, is a lot of work. Najee Harris was second to that with 307 touches, He had 18 touchdowns and just a scoring machine, and that's a very important part of grading these running backs at the end of the day. But man, he is every bit that guy who seems like the next best running back in the league, and Derrick Henry was that guy. It's going to be 1A, 1B. It's hard to put them, one ahead of the other at this point. But Jonathan Taylor obviously has to go ahead and follow up a very good season that he had last year.
Yeah, listen, you hit it on the head. Listen, over 1,800 yards last year when everybody was stacking the box against this guy because they knew Carson Wentz couldn't throw the football. Their only wide receiver on the field really was Michael Pittman Jr. and like Mo Alley Cox, right? It wasn't a dynamic vertical offense last year, so you knew Taylor was getting the football, and he still averaged 5.5 yards per rush, which is just absolutely insane. And the guy had 18 touchdowns on the ground. And he, this is where he kind of is different from a guy like Derrick Henry, or even, he had 40 catches last year. And he had, 2 touchdowns in the air, only 4 fumbles, that last year, and 2 of them were lost. He's just absolutely the most dynamic running back in the league right now on the ground. I think they're probably going to try and dial back his rushes this year just to be able to preserve him long term. But I think that he's going to be more involved in the passing game with Matt Ryan, who's just a better quarterback and a more accurate quarterback. And I think that he's going to still be able to put up very big numbers. You're just going to see it in a different variety. But absolutely, he's my number one guy. I'm just thinking back to last year, that huge run that he had, against the Patriots to kind of seal that football game. He's just an outstanding football player, man. When everybody knew that the box is going to get stacked against him, he still finds a way to break off 75, 80 yards. So, Jonathan Taylor, the Wisconsin product. Wisconsin seems to churn out these great running backs every couple of years, and he might be the best of them all.
It's really good, and no question, number one right now. And you look at the fantasy implications as well. So that puts a pin on our top 5. It shook out like I thought we would. Exactly. Going to the rest of the show as we wind this down, talking about college football, Ross. We haven't talked about this at all, but I think that we would be, a little different, and as far as our picks for the playoffs and our impressions than Desmond Howard out here, and how ridiculous he was putting Pitt in the playoffs. He basically put Michigan, Pitt, A&M, and some other team that I'm forgetting, but that was just shocking for a guy who, the Michigan pick was obviously making a lot of sense for a guy who had played at Michigan and had made their first playoff appearance last year. But it does come down to Georgia and Alabama. I think it'll very well be a rematch. I think the college football gods would go that way. Looking outside of those guys, A&M could be up there. Ohio State is always a perennial player. Michigan, Texas A&M could be right there, and Clemson for sure. But have you followed college football at all? Are you looking forward to it?
I am looking forward to it. I was watching a little bit over the weekend. Obviously, we didn't have the marquee matchups out there. But to me, we get a big one. I'd say keep an eye on Utah as a team that could sneak into the top 4. They're ranked like right around 5 or 6 or 7 right now, depending on what poll that you look at. They could sneak in there as well. But to me, listen, Saturday night, you get a huge game right off the bat between Ohio State and Notre Dame. And obviously Ohio State with C.J. Stroud, who's going to be the Heisman favorite going into this year, they're going to be the heavy favorite, right? But listen, Marcus Freeman, as we know, has taken over as the full-time coach of Notre Dame. If he can shock the world, which I'm kind of rooting for the guy. I've never really been a Notre Dame guy, but I'm rooting for him. If he can shock the world and somehow upset Ohio State, that has huge parameters and ripples that we're going to see throughout the entire season. So just a really nice big test for both teams early on. But also what I like about that game is it's still early enough in the season where both teams can bounce back and still make it to the college football playoffs.
That was devastating. I did not hear the last bit of that, Ross.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's cool because we get a great matchup right off the bat between Ohio State and Notre Dame, and it could have huge ripple effects into the college football playoffs. But I think also both teams can bounce back, and because it's early enough in the season to where whoever loses, we can still see them at the end. So, kudos to those teams for playing very early on, having two so high-ranked teams, giving us a great marquee matchup on Saturday night.
It's great that is one of the. It is the premier matchup of the first weekend of college football, essentially, when it's usually, again, talking about the perennial superpowers. You're seeing Texas A&M play Sam Houston and Michigan play Colorado State, but you actually get some challenges here. And Ohio State playing Notre Dame. Ohio State still favored by 17 points, and I would honestly be very comfortable with them to cover there. But this would be one of those years where Notre Dame could make it super competitive. And every year Notre Dame seems to just, get right into that top five and make it pretty competitive for them. But it's like you said, with them having a different coach there, they could shock the world there. And in Ohio State, that's every year, Ohio State has been, Justin Fields has been there before. Guys like that where the expectations are really high, and the Big Ten finally wants to break through and beat one of these SEC teams that goes ahead. It's either Georgia or Alabama or Georgia, and they can go ahead and maybe shake it up. So we'll continue to follow that as we go along. The few notes that I have as we finish up here, Ross.
Yep.
The headline. I think it was Toronto. Where were they having sex in the baseball stadium?
And it looked like it was, was that Toronto or was it? It was, I don't know.
Somewhere where you shouldn't be having Toronto. Sex in public.
Yes. Which also, like,
was Toronto
have a hotel built into the stadium? Like, why can't you just have sex in the hotel in the stadium?
Go get a room. Why not?
Get a room.
So absolutely. So are you team yay or nay on having sex on the tarp?
I'm team nay. Those seats are probably filthy and they're cold, and listen, those cameras that they have, they're about $30,000 and they're really good, and they're going to be able to catch you at some point. And whatever, it's not worth going to jail for. Like I said, if you could buy a baseball ticket, you could buy a hotel room.
And the baseball ticket was probably a lot cheaper than a hotel room. Save your money there. Right. They once got busy in a Burger King bathroom, and now you're there. And then a trailer crashed in Memphis, Tennessee, spilling its contents of Alfredo sauce all over the highway. It is rare, this is one man's opinion, to find good Alfredo sauce. I think it's one of the more overrated sauces. It's largely terrible, but if you ask Michael Scott, you got a carbo load before races. Certainly good riddance to whatever was on that truck as far as Alfredo is concerned. It spilled Alfredo all over the highway. Did you shed any tears for that, Ross?
I did not. I am admittedly not a huge pasta person in general. Listen,
my God. We talked about this on the Barroom Network show. Not a pasta person.
I maybe eat pasta 10 times a year, if that. I'm just not a pasta person. I'd rather have my carbs doing something else. I'd rather eat the pizza. But if we're talking about Freddie Gibbs Alfredo, I'm all in on that.
Yes, sir. Good drop there. Ooh-wee. And you got to drag the pasta through the wheel. That's what you got to do if it's authentic. Go to like Gino and Marty's and do that in the West Loop. On the music tip, as we end the show here, the new JID album is fantastic. We talked about him dropping that album last week, and Forever Story came out last Friday. Dude, he is just coming with it, and I know he's going for Artist of the Year, and not a ton of features. He's big on the Dreamville label as far as showcasing a lot of the talent. Like Ari Lennox is on there, and Earth Gang. But what he's able to do by himself is just nuts. And I think and it had Mos Def on the album. It was so cool to see him having Mos Def on the album. And then Surround Sound, which came out, before it just gave taste of what the Forever Story was going to be like, came out, and sampling that Miss Fat Booty beat, which is one of my favorite beats, sampling Aretha at that point, was incredible. He just knocked it out of the park. And for him to go up against DJ Khaled and against streams and everything else there, it was one of the best hip hop albums of the year coming, at the tail end of the summer here.
I completely agree. I love the album from front to back. I knew it was going to be a good album. I mean, this is his third album now, right? His third studio album. But it was such a fun album. It reminds me a lot of some Lupe Fiasco vibes with a little bit of like Slum Village. He's got that melodic rap, but he's got the bars for days. The production on the album is absolutely outstanding. He's got great features. To me, it's the perfect cap to the summer as we got that last great summer hip hop album.
Yeah, man, so good. And again, your boy Jay-Z just killed it as far as DJ recruiting him, and On God did, just one of the best in the business to be on his albums, and Jay-Z just bodying his verses. It was something else. Whatever you think of DJ Khaled's albums overall, he recruits the best talent that you could possibly want, and Jay-Z just solidifying his representation probably as the best MC out there, and his history speaks for itself.
100%, and the fact that Guru told us today that Jay-Z did that all in one take. So I mean, his verse alone is about 4 minutes long. It's just absolutely insane. And yes, Jay-Z is going to go out there and prove to you that he is the greatest of all time. And a verse like that just absolutely solidifies that. I even think that verse is maybe in Jay-Z's top 20 of all time. But it's still one of the greatest verses that we've seen in the last couple of years. And that's just a testament to how amazing he is. I need an album from him. I need... It's been 6 years since 444, right? Like he needs to drop an album already, just because he's in such a different place now, introspectively, as an artist, as a person, as a husband, as a father, and I would just love to hear what he has to say on an album. The production would be good. The features, if he even had any, he doesn't need it, would be amazing as well. So Jay-Z, drop an album, man, please give it to us.
Please, man. You see your wife doing it and going right over to a different sort of genre. You don't need to change genres. Just come out with another hip hop album. You just gave us a taste from that DJ Khaled album. And
absolutely. The guy's over 50 years old. He's still able to do this. It's insane.
That is also just fucking wild that he is over 50 at this point, but he is super busy. Him and Wayne up there continue to be very, very busy guys at this point. All right, we're out of show. Thank you, everybody, for listening in on YouTube and on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your audio and visual needs, media needs. Follow the Barroom Network for more great programming like this. Follow them on Twitter at Barroom Network. Follow us on Twitter. Follow me at the Real Evan Mac. Follow Ross at Ross Reed. And we'll be back next week when football is officially here.
Sir.
Yeah.
Preview week finally. We got a game week finally.
Got a game week. We got to preview the matchups and everything else in between.
Absolutely.
But for now, enjoy this last weekend of summer. Enjoy your Labor Day weekend. Grill something good. Drink something even better. And everybody be good to each other out there. And so long for now.
Peace.